Hey, this is Chadillac, and you're here with the CRP. We're talking three sides to every story again tonight. We are doing part 2 of the Epstein debacle. That is murder, suicide, and we're going down the rabbit hole tonight with Devin Miller. Believe me, if he says he's got it, he's looked into it more than once, and he's looked into it more than 3 times. So this is three sides to every story. You're on the CRP. Don't forget to share and subscribe. You're here tonight with Miguel Iturrate and Devin Miller, and we're going to jump right into it. Devin, go ahead and take off. You're solo, brother.
Well, good talking to you guys tonight, man. And I did check out the first part. It was good. There's a lot of things about this issue that has motivated me to do some deep research into it. And it's a topic that, is not really new to a lot of people that have been looking into this kind of stuff for a long time. I knew of Jeff Epstein years ago in the Lolita Express and, the pedophile island, Little St. James and stuff down in the Caribbean. I've heard all about this for a long time. And, now digging a little bit deeper and really piggybacking off a journalist for MintPress.com, Whitney Webb's work, that I highly recommend people look into. And when this gets uploaded on YouTube, I'll be sure to leave some links into the description box. But the first thing I do want to talk about a little bit is that this is nothing new. The institutionalized pedophilia, just off the top of our heads, for anybody who's not had their head buried in the sand for the past several decades, knows of some very high-profile cases of institutional pedophilia in high places. When we think just off the top of our head, we got the whole Franklin cover-up in Nebraska with Boys Town, where this was foster children being shipped to the East Coast and being abused by very powerful leaders in business, and leading all the way up to Lawrence King, who was a congressman in the 80s. We got Penn State, and we've got obviously the Catholic Church. We've got all the different kind of scandals that have come out about Hollywood, and all from everything from Judy Garland to Corey Feldman coming out and saying that that's the biggest problem in Hollywood, to accusations being leveled against prominent directors like Harvey Weinstein and Steven Spielberg, and of course Roman Polanski. I mean, stuff has been well documented for a very, very long time. And that's not even to consider that we've had a similar case to the Jeff Epstein case just in recent decades across the pond in the UK with the Jimmy Savile case, which this was a BBC personality who was very well connected to the British royals, and a lot of entertainers, a lot of politicians, all this stuff. The same thing in the UK, very similar to what we see with Epstein, who was not only suspected but pretty much known, and it was pretty much an open secret that he was molesting a lot of young children. And
Devin, can I jump right on in and jump right to the part where we had left off last night from talking about this? And can you fill us in on more details on the Epstein case concerning the Florida judge that let him off easy, and the 2,000-page document that is supposedly supposed to be released, or they're trying to get it post-mortem? I don't know what the deal is on it. Can you talk more about that?
Well, we're definitely going to get to all that. And since you want to jump into the whole Epstein suicide, murder, and all this kind of stuff, the first thing, if you really want to know where the buck stops on this case, look no further than William Barr right now. How could he let this happen? How could William Barr allow this to happen to him in this jail cell? I mean, why did he not bring in witness protection? We're talking about one of the highest profile witnesses / criminals in U.S. history. I mean, the buck stops with him. And, then we get all these reports. I mean, none of it adds up. I mean, we all know that he tried to, quote unquote, commit suicide a couple weeks prior.
Did he? Devin, did he try to commit suicide?
That's the official story, and that's all we need to know, quote unquote, tried to commit suicide.
Do you believe he tried to commit suicide?
No, I don't. But,
Okay, go ahead.
Barr was in charge of his safety. U.S. Marshals should have been brought in to be watching this man 24/7 on an hourly basis. They should have been checking on him, not by the day, but by the hour. And then we know that prison guards were off duty for several hours, and cameras weren't functioning right, and he was taken off a suicide watch, and the cellmate was removed. I mean, when we get all this stuff, and then we find out that his hyoid bone's broken in his neck, and you've got other inmates that have came out and said there's
Wait a minute. Stop. Back up. There's me, for one, including a million other people that are watching this, don't know. What did you say? His neck was broken, and tell me about that first before we go further.
His hyoid bone in his neck was broken, and it was also very similarly broken in, or it either was or wasn't broken in the Eric Garner case, and that was one of the proofs. That
what does that suggest?
It suggests strangulation. That it's not impossible that he would be able to hang himself and break his neck, but I heard Anthony on the other podcast mention it. And he's absolutely right. At the very, very bare minimum, taking any sort of speculation out of this, at the very least, they did not even just crack the door for this to happen. They kicked the door open and basically dragged him into a position where he was going to kill himself. I mean, everything was there and arranged for the perfect storm for him to kill himself. And you also, in any sort of crime, in any sort of situation, you always got to ask what would be the motive. And then when you know about the connections that this man has and all the different variables that could tie into who Jeff Epstein is, it makes a lot more sense. And then this led me to dig in a little bit deeper. And like I said, I highly recommend Whitney Webb's series of articles on this from mintpress.com, where she's done an amazing job of cataloging all the examples of sexual blackmail dating back to the days of organized crime during the Prohibition era. And
okay, hey Devin, let me interrupt again. I want you to start with, because we're limited on time, I'm going to have to kind of cut you off on things. I know that sucks, but I need to cut you off and get to some bullet points. So the first thing I want you to get to is tell me this. If he was able to kill himself, how was he able to do that with 15 different pieces of protection in place? How did he kill himself with 15 different protocols in place for someone who's on suicide watch or has been on suicide watch? Can you explain that first?
Well, I mean, it is true that he was taken off a suicide watch, which is just unbelievable. I mean, in no other case, I mean, there would be families that would be suing any sort of correctional facility if you had a man who, by official reports, on mainstream media reports, tried to commit suicide a few weeks earlier, and they take him off a suicide watch. I mean, and this is, like I mentioned earlier, one of the highest, most notable witnesses and criminals this country may have ever seen. We're talking about right now. This is a man who there were jokes, there was memes and pictures on social media twirling around for a month of people saying he's going to kill himself. He's going to kill himself. They're going to suicide himself. You've got people that are connected to this guy that are connected to other suicides and other cover-ups. And they're really going to let this, I mean, they're not even trying to hide it anymore, Chad.
Yeah. So are you saying that they're just blatantly coming out in the daylight and saying, you know what, we don't care what you do or don't say about this. This guy's got to die because he knows where the bodies are at. Is that the problem?
Well, I know that you've never shied away from letting me get on here, and I know you yourself, and I know Miguel has mentioned some stuff on this. I mean, so we're not afraid to touch on conspiracies here. I believe that this is nothing new, Chad. It's just getting even more blazing because nobody's believing it. Nobody believes this. Nobody. Very few people believe this, the official story on this. But I believe dating back to since they were able to kill the president clearly on national television and have.
Okay, that's a lot deeper rabbit hole, right?
I know.
So what I'm going to ask you to do is this. What Devin? I know it's going to upset you, but what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to try and steer you into just Epstein for right now. Yeah. And then let's take the rest of the rabbit hole after we get there. So guide me down the rabbit hole that takes me to assassinations of presidents and all of that. start with this. Who knew Epstein that would have killed Epstein? Tell me that first, because it seems pretty obvious that the guy didn't want to die. If he did want to die, how in the hell did he do it without assistance? And it looks very much to me like it is a murder-suicide. In other words, a situation where they murdered a guy and said he committed suicide. Do you agree with that? And if you do, can you tell me who's involved?
Well, I mean, you can't just isolate this, man. Like that, even in that question, you can't just isolate this because it goes a lot deeper. You're talking about a different view of what is really true about our government. We get this kind of smokescreen that they throw out there with our political debates and political elections and our little back and forth between Republican and Democrats, and he stands on this position and they stand on this position. It's all a gigantic smokescreen.
Okay, but Devin, before we get there, we have to prove, and I know this is frustrating for you.
Yeah, we can't get.
But before we get there, we have to prove some very basic things about this. So tell me who would be involved, why they would be involved or why they would not be involved, who wants him dead, and tell me how he becomes dead with a suicide that I believe is absolutely murder. And tell me how that happens first, and then let's broach that subject from there. Because if you don't do that, then we have no credibility. Go.
I actually think you lose credibility when you start naming stuff like, Donald Trump or the Clintons or all this, because it's so much deeper than that. You've got, and that's
how can it be deeper than Donald Trump and Bill Clinton?
Much deeper. You're talking, and that's why I do want to get into a lot of the what's been documented by Whitney Webb in her and a lot of other people now that are also tracing the same stuff about the history of sexual blackmail and how it's worked in Israeli intelligence primarily, which is what I think is more prominent today than anything, but also in
Israeli intelligence,
but also American intelligence, and how this elite superstructure that funnels up to the top of the pyramid, how they keep their underlings.
Let me, Devin, hold on. Let me bump in here real quick. Miguel, I need you to tune in on this for me for a second. Talk to me about the Israeli connection here and what you think of that.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I don't have any details. I'd have to hand the floor off to Devin, for more information on it. But it certainly doesn't surprise me. I think what happens in this type of situation, especially when you're asking to name names, I want to give credit to our listener Michelle from the first podcast because she brought up the point, and that point is simple, and it's. You've got Donald Trump, he's a Republican. You've got Bill Clinton, he's a Democrat. You've got, once we head down there, Devin's going to give names that I believe will probably go across the board. What gets them tied together is an elite level that they've achieved, the Bilderbergers or whatever it is that you want to call them. But it does go across. And Epstein becomes the type of guy that, as a witness, would have been the witness that not only can take down one or two power players or, multiple power players, but also might be able to give you some type of inkling of the complicity of how it might be, Democrats, Republicans, and everybody thinks and that really is all a show for the masses. And that's what Epstein does. It's like how she asked the question, Michelle asked the question, how can he hang out with Donald Trump and Clinton? How could Clinton hang out with a guy that knows Trump so well, et cetera, et cetera? And it's because at the end of the day, they're all friends.
Okay, so let me kind of put this together in a way that what our basic audience can sort of understand this as. When The Rock and Ryback go at it in the WWE, when it's over, they go back and they talk and they're laughing and joking, right? And they're having a good time. Oh man, you really caught me on that one. You really caught me on this one. So what we're really talking about here is we're talking about high profile people who, when it comes down to it, they're playing a part. Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever that might be, Palestinian, Israeli, whatever the part may be, you guys are bringing in names like Bilderberger, and man, immediately I go to, oh boy, here's a Bilderberger guy. So
No.
Devin, tell me why I don't go to Bilderberger. Why I don't go, oh no, not the Bilderbergers.
Well,
again.
first off, the Bilderberg group, I wasn't even going to bring that up, but that is a real thing. I mean, the Bilderberg group is a real annual gathering of members of top finance and big tech and politicians and media and all sorts of stuff, and they gather and they discuss world politics and world trends and stuff. But we keep going back to this Hillary, this like Clinton, Trump type of thing, and Republican, Democrat. We're talking more stuff like names like Ehud Barak, Leslie Wexner, people like Alexander Acosta, which I want to bring up, former labor secretary now for the Trump administration, who did orchestrate the sweetheart deal back in 2008 for Trump, who out of his own mouth is quoted to saying that he was told to back off on the Epstein case, that Epstein worked for American intelligence and was, quote, from Epstein, from Acosta himself, above my pay grade.
Okay, Devin, let me interrupt again. I'm sorry, but I got to keep doing this. As a fair moderator, I've got to do this, okay? I know this is upsetting, but this is the way it's got to be if we're going to get this right. Explain to me the names that you just explained and tell that you just expounded on, and tell me why they matter and what those names are, and go through detail. Tell me how that works.
Yeah, and I do want to get there because I literally have, as you see, front and back, pages of notes on this stuff from different stuff on names that I never even heard of until I was investigating this stuff and looking into just finding the right sources to learn from, and actually, like, we got open source media now where people write articles maybe super long, especially those Whitney Webb ones, but they all have different, like every paragraph has 2 or 3 different links in that she's putting in there to go look into things. And first off, I do think we need to lay a foundation on who Jeffrey Epstein was and what he was, what his property was. This man had property. This man had property in New York. He had property in Florida. He had property in New Mexico, Paris, and the Caribbean. Notably, the Caribbean islands is where the Little St. James pedo island was. And we know that he had 2 in particular accomplices that were very close to him. Number one,
Devin, let me hold on. Let me interrupt again. I'm sorry, man. Come on. We've got it. If we're going to do this, we've got to do it right. First of all, you have to explain to me what the little pedo island is. I don't know what that means. Give me that first, but before I can give you credibility, what is a little pedo island?
Little St. James was an island that Epstein bought, that was down in the Caribbean island, that has been really the main focal point of the whole Epstein scandal. That he had this private jet nicknamed the Lolita Express is what the jet was called, that he had a lot of different people that were very notable names that would fly into this private island. I mean, and we've seen drone footage of this island where on one particular hill there was like a cubed building that looks very much like a temple. It's actually kind of crazy. And and you can paint the scene. There's a lot of speculation because we don't have insider footage of what was going on there, but we do know underage girls were sent there with him. That's been several different testimonies have come out and confirmed that. But you can
how do we confirm that?
By people by his accusers who are saying that that's where a lot of this was going on.
Okay.
And this has been an open secret, like I said, kind of like with Hollywood pedophilia for several years. But when we look into this stuff, you can kind of get an idea speculating about what you would find there on an average party night. You're going to find big music. You're going to find cocaine all over tables. You're going to find the best alcohol. And you're going to find a lot of powerful, rich millionaires with a lot of money, all the money that they can to silence and shut up any sort of law enforcement. They got all their political backers, and it just so happens there's a lot of underage women running around who they might rather forcefully be asked to do a little bit of favor for so and so over there, and they do that voluntarily.
Okay, describe for me what you mean by underage women.
I mean, we've heard. Well, that's what I wanted to get to a little bit, because his main accomplice that we know for sure was definitely helping him in this sex trafficking was a man by the name of Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the leader of Into Modeling, and he was a Frenchman, and reportedly he was basically getting young models at the as young as 12, and basically, wow. And they reportedly. He was convicted of being a pedophile rape, and they were accusing him of basically trafficking him to very powerful elite circles.
So you're telling me that the guy that they said is sort of the coke pimp was bringing in girls as young as 12 years old, little girls, little girls. We're not talking about a 17-year-old girl who's almost 18. We're talking about little girls. Is that correct?
That's correct. And also, I think it's important to notice that when I named off the spots where Epstein has property, I named off New York, Florida, New Mexico, Paris, and the Caribbean islands. Well, I mentioned that that Brunel was a Frenchman, so the Paris place definitely is where that came from, where that connection came from into Paris. But also, M2 Modeling had a lot of spots, not only in Paris, but also in New York City, Miami, and Tel Aviv, Israel. Pardon my surprise.
Okay, so let me ask you this real quick, Devin. You interjected at one point Roman Polanski's name. Now, Roman Polanski is famous, of course, for drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl in basically the Beverly Hills area shortly before the Manson murders. Are you trying to suggest that this is sort of the same thing? Was Roman Polanski connected to any of this?
Well, you can't think of a very, very prominent common denominator that Epstein and Polanski had. Very close common denominator.
Wow.
One specific name. Alan Dershowitz was both their lawyers.
Wow.
Alan Dershowitz is also a hardcore international Zionist, connected to Israel and the Mossad, and connected to a lot of prominent Democrats, including the Clintons. And Alan Dershowitz has also been accused of rape, has openly admitted that he went to Pedo Island at Little St. James and got massages and stuff, but he didn't know about any of the nefarious things, of course. Of course, he's not going to come out and self-indict himself. But Alan Dershowitz not only was Epstein's lawyer, but he was also Roman Polanski's lawyer. And another thing to keep in mind, I mentioned earlier that the buck stops with William Barr, who didn't investigate this, and we'll get to Trump.
Can we go into that deeper?
Yeah, well, we'll get to Trump and all of his connections and his because I already said Acosta was the one who was Trump's labor secretary that organized the sweetheart deal in 2008 and was told that Epstein worked for intelligence. But then I mentioned William Barr, who's working for Trump, and get this, Donald Barr, William Barr's father, was the one who got Epstein his job at Dalton High School.
Okay, so let me slow things down. Hey, Devin, let me slow things down a little bit. I'm going to bring Miguel in. I want Miguel to just sound off for a moment on this, and then what I want you to do is collect your thoughts, and I want you to explain to me, because look, I'm a little slow-headed. I don't necessarily pick everything up, and you're throwing 100 names at me right now that I'm not necessarily making the connection to. Miguel, can you start to make the connection for me? And then after that, can Devin jump back in and make the full connection, please?
Yeah, I think, one of the points that I've been trying to get across is that, And I even mentioned we've done some podcasting on racism and things like that. And, we've got a lot, guns are another situation and stuff that, we see a lot of the population being pitted against each other and, or that there's a divisive, conversation of black versus white and that sort of stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, the real problem is becoming and has been the haves versus the have-nots. And in that case, you're talking about.
Are you trying to suggest that black versus white is not part of it? That's a made-up situation.
No, not that's a made-up situation, but it's a situation that, at the end of the day, many of the black people arguing with many of the white people are all in the same tax bracket, and they're all sending their kids to similar schools or the same schools even.
Right.
And there's a conflict among your peers. Meanwhile, there's an elite that sits above it that kind of, sort of orchestrates, watches, doesn't do anything, whatever complicity, that complicity of allowing it takes many different ways. But I do think it is the elite. So what happens is, picture a high school. And picture a situation where the most popular teacher of the high school was engaging in acts of sex with the students. Boy or girl, doesn't matter, it's minors, right? And then picture some of the other teachers know about it, and instead of going to the authorities and having this guy removed, which almost, on every single basis is what would happen in, schools once it comes to light, right? Now, picture instead of that, they closed ranks and said, no, he's really cool. He's all right. He does this. He's a great teacher. And they don't do anything about it. They protect him. Well, investigator comes around and they say no, or whatever. I think that's what happens with the elites. So even if you're not a pedophile per se, when a guy like Epstein, he's already in the club, goes down, yeah, okay, whatever it takes, Publish an article in the newspaper over here.
He's a good guy.
That says Pizzagate is, fake news and stuff like that. I brought up Pizzagate the other day. I'm ignorant. I don't really even know all the details about it. I just noticed that's a lot of the same names popping up again. And when there's fire, and when the same story, when the same story is repeating itself and following people around, there's more than likely some truth in it. And when you go across, so what happens to me too is, I mentioned the Bilderbergers and things like that. You got to be a pretty connected person to have the system protect you, I think. It really is an elite thing there, because you do have.
Yeah, but how do you?
You do have to have a lot of this system snap to it and say, okay, the guys that owns the newspapers and stuff like that is what it takes to protect a conspiracy.
Okay, but here's the problem with that, guys. Epstein was arguably as connected as a human being can be, and he's dead.
Well,
so Devin, I'm gonna allow you to jump back in here and go solo, and you tell me why I'm wrong that, if Epstein's so connected and Miguel's right, and the Vanderburgers and all that stuff and all, the whole elitist thing, and we can even get into cult and all of that crazy stuff, the Alex Jones conspiracy stuff. If all of that is true, which it might be, I'm not saying it's not. I'm not taking sides. But what I am saying is this: if Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, I don't know, if all of these guys are in some way through history, if there's some way involved in this, if they are complicit in any way, explain to me how that has never come out until right now, and explain to me, is Epstein the guy that knew where all the bodies were and they had to kill him? And if so, tell me how they did it. Go.
The thing that I hope gets conveyed more than anything is that this idea that that's our government, that's the main superstructure, that's where the pyramid ends is with Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump. That is a total smokescreen. That is not the case when it comes to this. And, I wanted to bring, I know I was throwing a lot of names out, but it's important to understand this. And the thing that needs to be addressed here that I hope that everybody gets is that what we're talking about with Epstein and why he had to go is we're talking about this was deliberately done, that he was an intelligence asset used to compromise elites. And this is nothing new. This dates back, like I said, to the days of organized crime and prohibition. I do want to get a little bit into that, but I mentioned earlier about Jean-Luc Brunel, who was one of the co-conspirators. We also know about Ghislaine Maxwell, who was also a former lover of Epstein, who was also, and just, it's definitely come out that she was very much an accomplice in helping him with his, pimping of these small children and all these different women. But also a thing that needs to be brought up is about Leslie Wexner, who was somebody that was that Epstein was very well connected to, who would help him in running charities. And they were always getting like 9 to 10 million donations circling around them, and they were embezzling the money in their so-called charities. And all the things that are coming out about Epstein is the same stuff that we've known about with organized crime and the CIA and Mossad in the past, which is blackmail, where we know that he bugged his New York mansion and his Caribbean getaways with mics and cameras and all sorts of different stuff. And Little St. John's was completely bugged, and that he was able to use this for extortion and blackmail. And all these tactics, as I've repeatedly said, but I want to get that point across, were really predate this whole scandal. This is nothing new, and it was really pioneered by the American Mafia during Prohibition. And some very influential figures in organized crime were involved in sexual blackmail. And that's something to keep in mind. And I want to name off some of these names. We've all seen documentaries, and we've been fascinated by the American Mafia for several years. People like, notorious gangster Meyer Lansky is one name that comes up. And he developed very close ties with the FBI while running a lot of sexual blackmail operations for several decades. And this is known fact. And he was a very influential part during the whole Joseph McCarthy days with his communist crusades. And one of McCarthy's closest partners was Roy Cohn, who later became.
Hey, Devin, can I stop you for a second? Because you just unraveled a whole bunch of stuff there. So, if I understand things correctly, you are in some way implicating the FBI,
no,
possibly the CIA, in some way implicating them to be in some way complicit with this, so that they can get more information to get a bust. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to kind of lay a foundation of the history of sexual blackmail that we know
go ahead.
right here in America.
Go ahead. I wanted to know that.
That was linked to the FBI, the CIA, and organized crime in the past. And, and I've been trying to fly through this because I know that there's three of us, and I do want to get some of this across. But let's just talk about prohibition for a second, and the roots of sexual blackmail with the mafia. We know that prohibition greatly strengthened the mafia by bootlegging and the trading of alcohol. I mean, that's common knowledge. We know about this. Well, many figures at that time who are still, you'll still find these names on flowcharts about Jeffrey Epstein. Many of those figures linked to those to politics and business. They would create these sex trafficking rings used for blackmail at that time. People like Samuel Bronfman of the Seagram's Liquor organization. I don't know if you've ever.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes.
Okay, so here's a kind of a reality check where I don't understand this, and it makes it hard for me to grasp this. I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I'm saying I need to understand this to go further with it and really understand the rabbit hole. So my grandfather married my grandmother, which was a World War II issue. She was a war bride, etc. My grandmother was German, had been held hostage by the Nazis for almost 2 years. My grandfather's company came in and rescued them, liberated the camp, or liberated the town of Herborn, Germany. And my grandfather was probably, I'm guessing, 20 to 21. And my grandmother was something like 13 or 14. And my mother came from that. So it's hard for me to look back and say, well, they had a different standard at that time, right or wrong. I'm not arguing, but they had a different standard at that time. So it makes it difficult for me to follow what you're saying and say, oh, these guys are wrapped up in some sex pedophile thing. Are you saying that they were having sex with girls or boys or whatever that were, 10 years old, 5 years old, and not, pubescent people, because that was not abnormal in 1920 to 19 hell from the time of pre-recorded history until until the 40s or 50s even. It was not uncommon for grown men to have sexual relations and marry very young girls, 13, 14, 15 years old. So can you extrapolate on that for me a little bit?
Yeah,
I make sure I understand that.
I do kind of want you to try to follow me here a little bit on this, because this is really where the rubber meets the road on this.
Okay.
You had, during Prohibition, you had two very notable liquor entrepreneurs, liquor moguls that were very heavily involved. And these were men like Samuel Bronfman with Seagram's and Louis Rosenstyle. They developed very, very close names with people like Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Al Capone, Joseph Lindsay, the notable names that we've known about in organized crime, to do their bootlegging for them. And
okay.
they developed these relationships with them. Well, they also developed very close relationships with people like J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. And
How so?
this is they would take part in a lot of different it is quoted by, I have a quote here about Louis Rosenstyle, that he was, quote, part of a consortium with underworld figures that bought liquor in Canada from Bronfman, along with mafia leaders like, all these different people like Lansky and Joseph Fusco and Al Capone and Joseph Lindsay and all this stuff. Well, they ended up developing very close relationships with the FBI too, and that's really not a secret that people like Meyer Lansky were very well known to be very close shoulder rubbers with people in the FBI and the CIA. There's a reason why some people, the same thing's still going on today with the drug war.
Okay, I want to get a little bit of feedback from Miguel on this, so that we sort of have another view, at least, even if it's the same thing, to collaborate. Miguel, can you talk a little bit on what Devin has just said regarding the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I know you've kind of followed that sort of thing for quite some time. I have not. So I'm asking to be educated on this. Can you tell me a little something about it, Miguel?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that it pops up, only because, J. Edgar Hoover was famous for having his file, on people, and, having something on them. He sort of made that up. And, how do you stay in power across all the administrations and things that, he stayed in power on? And it was, it's been written about and talked about in many ways. He was a guy who wanted to play that power game. So, he had dirt on, Kennedy with Marilyn Monroe, maybe, or whatever. And, he was playing that active game of taking pictures and having evidence against people that he could use for his own advancement, for his own protection, for his own whatever it was. It wasn't used for what the government does. So it doesn't surprise me that, that there could be some organization to that. Hey, I'd like to have something on this guy. And I don't know, I was in a meeting with him, and he was kind of his eyes lingered on some of the younger girls. So let's tempt him. Let's see what we get, and etc. Hoover was a dirty, dirty player. You know what I mean? Again, it comes with there is a strong theory on the internet that the American CIA, at its inception, was made up sort of to protect business interests more than the country's interests. So once you get into that theory, then all of this kind of chains together. You know what I mean?
Okay, Devin, go ahead and go from there on that then. Oh no, Devin just locked up on me.
He'll be back in a minute.
He'll jump back on.
I think he'll come back here.
Yeah. So Miguel, go ahead and tell me the rest of what you were saying about that. I'm gonna make sure I bump Devin back on. That takes just a second. So.
Okay. I mean, just to continue talking. I mean, he mentioned the 60s and things like that. And obviously the big thing involving, the same players, the mafia, the CIA and stuff, was the Kennedy assassination, right? And
yeah.
I mean, in general, I think, as an educated American, at the very least, we can say that we all want to know a little more. That I'm very skeptical about the one gunman theory of Lee Harvey Oswald, right? I'm very skeptical about that theory. So now, once that, so let's say that we all accept it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. Who was it?
Okay.
Right?
So Devin's back with us. So Devin's back with us now. Let's go ahead and let him carry through with where we were at. Apologize for that. There are glitches on all of these platforms. Sorry, folks. Devin, go ahead. Take us from there. Take me down the rabbit hole. I'm ready to go.
Okay. Because this is going to take some time. It's not something we can do in sound bites, and that's a big problem with our culture. Is they want quick sound, and there's no way to do that like this. You had Louis Rosenthal and Samuel Bronfman.
Hey, Devin, can you talk up a little bit more for me?
I'm trying, man.
I'm sorry.
I'm telling you, dude. This has been so incredibly fun. I don't.
No, you're doing great. Please continue.
I'll get into it here, and it'll get better soon. But anyway, you had Samuel Bronfman, Louis Rosenthal, big liquor tycoons who are closely associated to the American mafia and began developing close friendships with people like J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. And for any evidence of that, you had Hoover's very close assistant that was like his right-hand man, really, Louis Nichols, was appointed as the VP of Rosenthal's Schlindly Empire in the late 1950s. If that tells you.
So you are saying that through prohibition and what do you call it? Making of liquor. I forget what the term is, but because of prohibition, these guys were able to get connections with the FBI, right?
Well, they got connections with organized crime through that, and then after prohibition, they just became, they became a legal business at this point. And,
okay,
and
gotcha.
That they were, they were just big businessmen who were.
Okay, we're getting pretty far out here.
No, we're not.
Can you bring this back to how this works with Epstein?
Yes, we can. And it's understanding this will get you to understand the big picture of sexual blackmail and who Epstein probably actually was for the elites and what he was used for. So here's the picture in a nutshell. You have two bootlegger barons, Bronfman and Rosenthal, now respected liquor business tycoons because prohibition's over, and they both have big associations with organized crime and with the FBI and business and political elites. Well, here's the thing. They were very similar people, Bronfman and Rosenthal, but they had completely different personalities. Rose Bronfman was married once in a very just normal, just very just buttoned up to the book. Didn't really have too much going on other than his associations with organized crime back in the day. You don't really find too much about him, although there is some stuff that you'll find a little bit later with him. But Rosenthal, on the other hand, 5 times married and was well known for his bisexual antics. And he, during one of Rosenthal's divorce, his ex-wife, Susan Kaufman, alleged that Rosenthal would host extravagant parties and he would hire boy prostitutes during them. And at these parties, she said that a lot of government officials and prominent figures of organized crime would attend these parties. And that he would organize these parties, and then he would make sure these venues were completely bugged with microphones all over the place. So here you got this liquor tycoon organizing these parties, buying up a bunch of boy prostitutes, and I'm sure it wasn't just young boy prostitutes. I'm sure he had a lot of other prostitutes for those who weren't into that kind of thing. But he's inviting prominent members of both the worlds. The government, FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he's inviting these members of the mafia. And Rosenthal would organize these parties, bug the place, and Kaufman, his ex-wife, during one of his marriages, all this is public record, I've seen the documents, she would organize, she said that these were organized for the exact purpose of blackmail. She said that he would literally...
Okay, let me cut you off for just a second, Devin.
Okay.
So so let me clarify, okay? What you're saying is there is literally a group of people, or not even a group. There are a couple of people who have decided, look, if we figure out what their weakness is, and this weakness is something that socially and politically will corrupt them and make them look badly, possibly even make them lose their political power, they'll do anything we want them to do to save that power. Am I right on that?
I see kind of where you're going with that, but I think it's just they knew that sex is something that people bite on, that people have a dark side to, that they tend to try to cover up. Is there people tend to have double lives in the sexual realm, and these people knew that in Rosenthal, now with all of his buddies in government, business, organized crime, the FBI, the CIA, he's like, okay, I'm going to throw these big parties and I'm going to bug the whole place. And I'm gonna invite a bunch of prostitutes in. I'm gonna have all these notable names, and I'm gonna use this. And his ex-wife is saying, that this was for the exact purpose of blackmail. And
Miguel, do you agree? Do you agree with this?
I mean, it's a matter of agreeing or not. I mean, the fact is that there are a lot of ties between the government and organized crime, and how does that happen? Yeah, it's sophisticated. There are a lot of players. It doesn't surprise me that once you've got all these high-level players, and even if it's type A personalities, that somebody decides, hey, I need something on these people, maybe even just to protect themselves or whatever it is. There's also the case during World War II of Germany actually getting a boat in New York Harbor to sink. They blew up a boat in New York Harbor, and during the investigation of that, military intelligence, which is the predecessor to the CIA, they didn't know what or who to turn to, so they had to go to the mafia because the mafia owns the docks in New York. So there's another place where they became connected, and all of a sudden, and that spurns a whole different other thing. So the connections, I think, are happening between power players. And once again, what happens? At some point, you're eligible to make these connections. And at some point, you're in the club and you're an elite. And now you get to play instead of get, like
so
I said.
So you're kind of agreeing with the idea that Devin's saying,
once
you join the club, you're in, whether you want to be or not.
Listen to the scenario Devin's talking about. All the while, this guy was, now he's not a criminal anymore, right? But he was a criminal. So now all the while he's there, he's still making connections, not only in the government, but also, in the other people in the underworld and stuff like that. It's like, and they all become connected. They're not, in a situation where it's just clearly black and white. They needed each other. When the CIA,
they're not hanging out, other than they hung out one time, and that one time was enough. So, Devin, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
that the one time was enough. And so tie this back to Epstein.
They didn't hang out one time. This was
give me the tie to Epstein, because we've gone way off on a whole bunch of other things. I haven't heard a lot about Epstein yet, and whether or not he murdered himself.
This is all about Epstein. That point does not matter at this point. He's dead, and pretty much nobody believes that he murdered himself. This is something very deep that has the potential of really shining light on a lot of things that have been kept covered for a lot of years, and what the purpose of it all was. Keep in mind, Meyer Lansky, dude, Al Capone, all these. There was not a bigger syndicate in organized crime at that time.
I totally agree with that, but you're so far back in line, Devin.
But this matters.
Okay, listen.
One of the most
give me just a second. You're so far removed by time. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not saying you are or are not wrong. I'm not agreeing nor disagreeing. I'm simply saying the audience needs a way to connect all of this together. So I'm asking you to connect Epstein to everything you're saying now. Can you do that?
Try to get there, yes. And
go ahead. It's all yours. You've got 10 minutes.
We cannot just skip sections on this. Lansky, one of the most notorious gangsters in history, never served a day in jail. This is probably due to the fact that organized crime leaders and prominent government officials supposed to be trying to, dissolve that and bust it. They had a lot of common people in the middle. People like Louis Rosenstein, people like Samuel Bronfman, who they would go to these big dinner parties, and they knew their private lives very well. I mean, for example, Samuel Bronfman would also throw big extravagant dinner parties in Lansky's honor. He would get him coveted boxing seats, for example, this big liquor magnate. Rosenstein would do the same for Lansky. Lansky and Bugsy Siegel would work for naval intelligence during World War II. I mean, the CIA even turned to Lansky to help him assassinate Fidel Castro in the 1960s. Lansky was also well connected to Israel's Mossad. And I have to lay this out there to show that there's this connecting underworld that's not brought up in the front man of presidents and political parties and stuff.
Hey, Devin, I know this frustrates you, man, but time restraint makes us have to do this. You said you were going to
give him 10 minutes, though.
But listen, I want to ask this because I think it's important. So, are you saying that in the same way that I know that you are a former smoker, and maybe you don't want people to know that you're a former smoker because you used to smoke cigarettes and you gave it up, right? Or I'm a former drug user, and I don't want people to know that I'm a former drug user, and that maybe that could harm me in some way if I was running for a political office where I was such a socialite that it mattered. Are you saying that they were trying to capture people in that web, and by doing so, they could make them and manipulate them to do whatever they wanted and allow them to do what they wanted to do? Or is it more that they were doing it just to capture them? In other words, was Epstein a pedophile, or was Epstein somebody who used pedophilia to make a difference and to manipulate people and to tell them what they were and were not going to do? Go from there.
Epstein was a useful asset in the same way that what I'm getting at. It is well known This is not fringe history. It might not be talked about on CNN and stuff all the time, but it's very well known that Meyer Lansky received compromising photos of J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was well known in the underworld to like to dress in drag and all
Correct.
sorts of stuff. This is well known. And Hoover was supposedly in some gay situation, as it was described, and that's how it was described, not how I'm describing it. And Hoover was known to be bisexual and often dressed in drag. This is probably likely due to the kind of ties that they mutually shared at these mutual venues that were bugged intentionally. Well, this was later. To cut the story short, since you want me to condense a lot of it, this was picked up by the CIA and by intelligence assets like like American intelligence with the CIA, with the FBI, and with Israel's Mossad, in order to start when we get into people like Roy Cohn and all this stuff that were deeply tied to people like Roger Stone and Donald Trump and Reagan and all this stuff. Intelligence organizations learned that they can start using businessmen, underground figures and stuff to start using blackmail as a way for not only extortion, but also to keep people compromised.
Okay, you just mentioned Assad, Israel. Go there a little bit for me.
When you look at the Epstein story, it's just wrapped up completely in Israel. I mean, is where you find a lot of it. For example, Leslie Wexner, who I mentioned earlier, who was involved with a lot of charities, quote unquote, with Jeff Epstein, she just gave him his Manhattan penthouse that he had. I mean, there's really no record of anything ever being bought from Epstein. That was like a gift from Leslie Wexner. Well, Leslie Wexner started the Wexner Foundation. She was also part of the quote unquote mega group, which was just a group of Jewish billionaires, and that was very close to Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister of Israel, and very close to names like Edgar and Charles Bronfman of the Seagram's Liquor Foundation. And Edgar Bronfman was at one point the president of the World Jewish Congress.
Are you talking about the brand name Seagram 7?
Same family. That started with Samuel Bronfman, who I was mentioning earlier during Prohibition. One of the two names, him and Louis Rosenstock.
Okay, go ahead.
He was deeply tied to Leslie Wexner, who was deeply tied to Jeff Epstein. And when we look into Ghislaine Maxwell and her connections, we look into Alan Dershowitz, who's very well connected to Israel. We look into the Nexivim cult, which was, very close to Claire Bronfman, who was very close to. I mean, there's so much here, and all of it ties back to most likely Jeff Epstein was somebody that was being used by elite figures in American politics, American intelligence, and Israeli politics and Israeli politics and intelligence, and he was being used for blackmail operations. He was being used as an intelligence operation, which is what Alexander Acosta said why he wrote his Sweetheart Deal back in 2008. Yeah. He said, he's above my pay grade. I was told he was part of intelligence. This is somebody who was being used to compromise people for the purposes of blackmail, and a lot of people believe that's how he made most of his money. Was through extortion. Can
I cut it? Can I cut in for a minute? And listen, I gotta be fair here. I have to give more than one side to this story. Okay, so I apologize in advance if I'm cutting you off. I don't mean to, and I'm going to give you plenty of time. We've got 30 more minutes so we can do this, but I want to make sure that I get everything in. So Miguel, can you sound off for me on what you believe Devin has just said, and where do you divide from Devin on this? Where do you have disagreements on Devin? Do you have any?
I've been trying to say that I believe that there's a war of the haves and have-nots and the elites versus the non-elites, and that this ties into that. And so none of the things that he tells me or that he's stating here, surprise me. And there have been a lot of details that I hadn't heard of. When he mentioned the Mossad, a lot of people think, oh, a rabbit hole or whatever. But, from what I know of the Mossad, and now we're talking about certain players here that do happen to be Jewish, is if you're Jewish, you're on the Mossad's radar in one way, shape, or form. And you're talking about, I don't know, maybe not anymore, but from when I was a kid, the Mossad is the A-list of intelligence agencies. And it's not because they play by the rules all the time.
Well, we can certainly agree that the Mossad created the Mujahideen, right? Which led to Al Qaeda.
I mean, that's a different story, but involved with our military and stuff like that. I'm sure that they're all involved in there. The Mossad worries a great deal about they're there to protect Israel, and Israel is sitting there on an island surrounded by enemies that have tried to blow them away. A little further off, you've got Iran there. So I think that the Mossad doesn't look at themselves and say, no, we're not going to look at that, or limit themselves in any way, shape, or form. So when you get a guy who's about to break into billionaires club like an Epstein, and he's Jewish, I'm not surprised they keep an eye on him. They keep an eye on him, and he's a good boy. But they keep an eye on him, and he's a good boy. Life goes on. But they keep an eye on him, and he does interesting things like fly Prince Albert, allegedly, or X and Bill Clinton and this all going to an island. Maybe they all go to the island, and then during different trips, Epstein engages in pedophilia. But now they're real close and they're real tied, and this guy's worth watching real close. So it doesn't surprise me that the Mossad might be involved, and the Mossad might see him as an asset. And what's the connection is that he's Jewish, and that there, if you look at it, just as an observer, there are a lot of Jewish names tied around to this.
Okay. So
throughout the whole conversation,
Jewish names.
Okay. So that breaches a whole different conversation that is very difficult politically and otherwise to get into. But what I do want to talk to is this. What I do want to speak on is this. What I hear both of you saying is that there is an organization that has been used for generations to make sure that they can keep dirt on someone else. And keeping dirt on someone is as simple as, like I said, hey, I know Miguel and I've known him for 20 years. And I know that at one point in his life, he liked to partake in drinking alcohol. And so, that's not a big deal. But what if I know something much bigger about Devin or Miguel? And that gives me an awful lot of power over them, because I can say, hey, by the way, you're running for office now. If you don't want me to expose this, then you had better give me X, Y, and Z. Is that what we're saying? First of all, Devin, go from there.
I do want to talk on this because, and I think I'll scare you a little bit with this.
And by the way, I don't know anything about Devin or Miguel.
Because
just an example.
First off, I will speak. I'm not. It's been needed to be said forever. I am not a fan of Ilhan Omar, but for her the outburst against her for daring to even question Israeli power in our government earlier this year. There's a reason behind that. It's because nobody can question that. You look at our foreign policy. You look at there's no more powerful lobby in Washington than AIPAC. That is well known. You look at our foreign policy, it is a lot of dual citizens with the state of Israel. Israel is basically an offshoot of the American empire in the Middle East right now.
Absolutely.
And was placed there by the Anglo-American establishment for the sole purposes of having a permanent presence and permanent pretext in the Middle East back in the 1940s. And that's, I mean,
and Devin, you are talking about after World War II, correct?
after World War II, these plans were definitely being drawn up way before that, and there was a lot of legit Jewish persecution on Jews
Of course.
in Europe for centuries, and I don't want to get into that because that will take us on a completely different rabbit hole. But you were mentioning about having compromised information, and that's why I was trying to bring up, I could talk about that for 45 minutes to an hour at least, about how that morphed, how this beginnings of business and organized crime and government and
Okay, so Devin, take me to Epstein now, and tie that together for me now, and take 20 minutes to do that.
I won't need 20 minutes, but we've seen with dating back to Prohibition, we've seen this creation of this tying of knots of different forms of industries, organized crime, business, politics, intelligence, all these people, about how they're connected. They're not isolated sectors of our society. These people are connected, and they started weaponizing sex. They started to learn how to use compromising information for their benefit. And it shouldn't have taken that long to really figure out that that's what they were doing. And I'm sure that this was happening earlier in society on a smaller scale, but with the advent of technology and stuff, we've started to see it more. Flash forward to today, I do believe that Epstein was well connected to a lot of people in both the Israeli government and the American government. Was used.
Tell me who.
In intelligence, and we've already
that's a broad spectrum.
I mean, you're wanting specific names. I mean, I've given thousands of them. I mean, Charles Bronfman, Edgar Bronfman, Ehud Barak, Leslie Wexner.
Tell me who they are.
Alan Dershowitz, Jared Kirshner, who's very connected to Alan
talk
Dershowitz,
to me about Jared.
Who he just very close to Alan Dershowitz also, and he is Donald Trump's stepson. But Clinton and Trump are such a small piece of this overall puzzle. I mean, they're really not that big of a deal on this. Like,
yeah, but Devin, let me butt in for a second, okay? Look, you're talking about the idea that Clinton and Trump, very small pieces of this, they mean very little to this. So if that's the case, who does mean something about this, and how are they tied to our political system in the United States today? Because that's what people really want to know. They don't care about whether they were tied to Al Capone. Okay, yeah, they were tied to Al Capone or Abraham Lincoln. They don't care about that. What they want to know about is how are they tied today? Who committed the murder that we called suicide? Because I don't think there's a person on the planet who knows anything about how a facility is run that can call that anything less than murder. Do you agree with that, first of all?
I would say that if they don't care about learning about the history of the origins of this stuff, then they don't really care about the truth about this. Understanding where we've come from with sexual blackmail and how it's being used would understand the time that we're really walking into. Because we're walking into a time where our entire lives are digitalized and online. And this is going to become even more sophisticated to where they will be able to find out any information about you. We know today that there's there's employers that will look up applicants' Facebook page to see stuff about them. And when we start going down the road of social credit scores, where we have, different types of what they believe, what they've done, who they've been with, and all this stuff, everything has to be data mined. It's going to be so much harder, so much easier to keep a profile on people. And people always are going to try to find ways to escape the kind of prism that we see being constructed around us and go in the dark. And, they got different stuff that they want to do in dark. And that is one thing that we get from this scandal, is that a lot of these prominent public officials, a lot of times they're not the same people in the dark than what they are in the light. And also on top of that, it gives you this indication that this power structure goes a lot deeper than just the surface level of Congress and the presidency and the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. This is an apparatus that's soaking up information and is tied to several different people in different parts of the world that are doing what they can to obtain compromising information on people to be used against them in the future. And that's what
Hey,
we've
Devin.
seen with people like Jeff Epstein, and I doubt he's isolated. I'm sure there's a lot more examples of Jeff Epstein's that we don't know about.
Hey, Devin, can I say this? Can I say that this sounds an awful lot like the idea that people are trying to make sure they have enough information on people that if they try to come after them, they can burn them. And then the people that know that they can burn them have information on them as well, so that we have at a minimum a stalemate. Do we agree with that?
Now you're asking me to get into theory stuff. My biggest question on this whole thing is, why is this coming out? Because there's one side of the crowd who believes that Donald Trump is like this firewall, this flamethrower to the deep state, that he's bringing stuff out into the light. Well, my biggest question on that is, when we look at this kind of stuff, we know a lot of ties, especially when you get into Roy Cohn and all this stuff, lead back to Donald Trump and his connections with Epstein, and he's just as connected to this apparatus in New York and all the and he's been dubbed the first Jewish president because of how well connected he is to international.
Okay, so let me cut you off for a second. Let me ask Miguel. Miguel, what is your retort to everything that's just been said? Because I mean, you're a guy kind of set in the middle, and you're a guy who's never shied away from a good conspiracy, and a good conspiracy can actually very often mean that it's a real conspiracy. So can you wrap up what Devin is trying to say to me, and trying to tell the audience, in your opinion, before I let him go on for another 10 minutes and really blow the doors off of this?
Yeah, I think, if everything that the pieces come together here, what you're talking about law enforcement agencies of some type, CIA, FBI, Mossad or whatever. So some type of there who are, casting a net of observation that's illegal in the United States. You really are not supposed to, you have to have some cause for that sort of stuff, all right? But so aside from that, they're casting out this net, and whatever is out there, they come across a crime such as pedophilia here, and rather than investigate it, pursue justice in the ways of the American system, they let it go on in case it can be used as an asset for other reasons. That's the theory. And I think that if that proves to be true, that it wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Devin, I'm going to turn over. We're in an hour and 11 minutes. I'm going to turn over the next 29 minutes to you, and I'm going to let you go off. And I'm not going to interrupt. I promise. I'm done. I don't have anything else to say until we sign off. You have 29 minutes to prove your case. Go.
I don't need 29 minutes. I mean, maybe 5 to even, because we've covered so much as it is. But just as a refresher, what we're talking about here is organized blackmail. We're talking about power, being able to keep the lid on an open secret. And I know that sounds kind of like a contradiction there. If it's an open secret, keeping the lid on it. But really what it means is that there's not going to be any accountability for this.
Right.
How was Jeffrey Epstein able to get away with this in the open for so long? People knew that this was going on, dating for several years, and people know what's going on in Hollywood. People knew what was going on in Penn State, and it was covered up. People have known what's going on with the Catholic Church for years. There is, and you brought up stuff with Donald Trump and having conflicting information on both sides. And that's a lot of my theory about what's going on with this whole case. I don't know why this is becoming out into the light now. Like I don't know if killing Epstein needed to happen to keep a lid on stuff from other stuff coming out.
What would they keep a lid on?
It could wrap up a lot of other people, but I honestly think that a lot of the phony conspiracy stuff that are coming out about Donald Trump and the Clintons and all the stuff like stuff like Russiagate and stuff like the Hillary Clinton email scandal, which there's some validity to both of those, but at the same time they're so small compared to the Clinton Foundation and that racket. Or looking into Donald Trump and his connections to people like Roy Cohn and Jeffrey Epstein and some of the shady people that he was connected to on the East Coast and down in Mar-a-Lago and down in all these different areas. I do think that there is a chilling effect when you get these kind of power circles that they know we take him down, we expose him, he could take a lot of people down with us. And I can only speculate from there. But I do believe that Jeffrey Epstein was somebody that was used and profited off of obtaining blackmail information. And I think not only did he obtain that information and use it for extortion rackets on individuals, that he knew, okay, this person doesn't really need, there's not any third party that wants compromising information on this dork, but I can ruin his reputation by, hey, look what I got, buddy. Pay up, or I'm going to leak this to the tabloids. I'm going to leak this to the New York Post. I'm going to leak this to these different organizations. And they pay up, and he makes his money. What are they going to do? They're going to go turn him in? And then he turned, he's extorting me because I've got, he's got images of me sleeping with a 13-year-old girl in his bedroom of his little penthouse in the Caribbean islands. They're not going to do that. So there's like this a mutual, I want to remain silent here, so I'll just pay up to keep the lid on this, to shut this up.
How much money is involved in that, Devin?
I think there's millions, because we're talking powerful, rich people. And I think this goes on a regular basis. And you would think that these people, and, this is one of the, the lessons here is, number one, what's done in the dark will be brought to the light. That oftentimes, you can run on for a long time, but sooner or later, God's going to cut you down. That justice will come, that things that are done in the dark will be brought to the light. Another thing is, be careful who you trust. Be careful who you trust with your dirty deeds and your dirty secrets. Be careful what circles you're involved in, because these elites get mucked up with one another.
Is there anyone you can trust when you're an elite?
No, I don't believe so. I don't.
Why on earth would these people? Why on earth would these people begin to trust anyone? Is it a drive? Is it something that's built within them that says, I have to have this? Is it an addiction? What is it?
Because they think these connections are going to get them to the next rung. There's never this satisfaction of where they're at on the pyramid structure. They want to move up. They want to get even more tighter knit. They want new opportunities. And it just so happens, there's other conspiracy theories that this kind of stuff, pedophilia and all this stuff's an initiation rite. And there's even evidence of this stuff in secret cults dating back to, you think going back to Prohibition is going back. You go back to ancient cults and to the Middle Ages and stuff, you're talking,
Oh
pedophilia.
boy.
You know, if you want to be part of our clique, we're going to get some compromising information on you because this is an initiation rite. You're going to do this so that we know you're going to be loyal because we got you on videotape sodomizing a 10-year-old. I know that's graphic, but you know,
Hey Devin, can I break my promise and bring Miguel in for a minute just to talk to him about that?
I said I didn't need that long.
Okay, so Miguel, can you comment just a little bit on what Devin just said?
I mean, it's a long rabbit hole. Let me wrap it up on my end with this thing. You know, if what we're saying is correct, is the theory, right? And that is that, you know, Epstein is a man who was born and somewhere he had a predilection for young girls. On top of that, he had connections, made some money and stuff, and he became an asset for these players. He became a place where, hey, he invites, he has parties. They're starting to tape it as far as just to see what they get and what dirt they have on people. Of course, throughout all this, they also have a lot of dirt on Epstein, but, you know, he's sort of doing what he has to do here. Now, what happens is there are some good people. Epstein was a fool in many ways because, you know, he did flaunt this. You know, he'd already been convicted one time, and he didn't stop doing it. You know, part of the testimony that got him caught is...
Could he have stopped doing it?
I don't know. I don't know. But the point is you know, the reason we are where we are is because there are good people that didn't let the Epstein investigation die. They would have, if they could have, they would have gotten him out of the news the first time. But there are like reports of like simple things like air traffic controllers that see the people getting onto the private planes. And them saying, man, you know, those are young girls again, because it's the same air traffic controller at the same airport. You know, so those guys saw a lot. And Epstein was still at the airport with young girls, bringing them in, even though he was convicted and stuff like that. So it was known and stuff. And it's because they brought it out to the news and it didn't let it die that he was ruined as an asset. So now what happens is if you're an asset, you know, and you have information, that's what's the key. That information is not for Epstein to give out. It's not for him to say, you know, Stephen Hawking didn't sleep with anybody. That was a visit, you know, based on, you know, I gave him some money for research or whatever, and X and Y were not involved in that. But yes, this guy.
Or maybe he did.
This guy.
Why is it that Stephen Hawking has to be squeaky clean of all this?
No, but I'm pointing out, the point is that if they recorded and have the data that Jeffrey Epstein was providing them, which is all the people he flew in and stuff, then who knows whether Hawking was doing that or not? Who knows whether X and Y were guilty? Epstein does, right? But they don't want Epstein using that information to protect himself or allow or mitigate his sentence or give people up. That information is for them to use when they see fit. So they get rid of Epstein because he's no longer a viable asset. That's all. I mean, that's
okay.
As cold as it gets.
Okay, so let's wrap this up with this. We're at an hour and 21 minutes. Let's wrap this up with this. Tell me this, Miguel. I'm going to give you first shot at it, and then take a couple seconds. And then wrap it up because I know you don't have much else to say on it. And then let's let Devin really, really wrap it up and we'll finish it. So, first of all, tell me this. Did Epstein kill himself or was he murdered? That's what I really want to know first and foremost. Miguel, you go first.
I think what I mentioned in the last conversation is the essence of it. He's a ruined asset.
Don't care. I want to know if you believe if he killed himself or not.
If he killed himself, if he said if he actually did the act without any help or anything like that, it's because he knew they were coming for him. They were going to come for him.
He knew that killing himself would be easier than what they were going to do to him.
No, they'll kill him anyway. It's the right. It was time for him to go. And I think the writing on the wall said it. And if he knew, if he was smart, there might be assets who don't know it, right? You
Okay.
know? So, but I think he recognized it, so he may have well tried to kill himself. You know, there does, when you're that narcissistic, there does have to be a jolt and a half in your life, you know, in order to make you suicidal all of a sudden. But yeah, I think the fact is he's in jail, not in his $70 million home where he has to be, you know, house arrested again, you know, playing the system and stuff. That's when one of the messages was sent that you're caught this time. And I think once that dawned on him, then yeah, he might have wanted to end it all and end the suffering. He didn't want to have to go, you know, in front of a court or actually have to answer, you know, the questions that come next. What is interesting is what I want to see next is one of the names in the myriad of names that Devin mentioned, and you know, sometimes they get, you know, it's like who was that? Who was that? One of them was Ghislaine Maxwell, and this was his sidekick. Now, this woman was his girlfriend, and she was a procurer, according to many of the people, for him of girls and stuff. Yet she remains free, not under investigation, stuff like that. That, to me, I think, is a sign of a conspiracy theory, because you get to the bottom of this. Epstein's dead. You still got to get to the bottom of it. What was going on, you know? So you know,
are you saying that she escaped because she turned?
No, I'm saying she's been laying low and laying very quiet. And for example, there's a person who would certainly benefit from Epstein's death.
Okay, so Devin, I'm going to give you the final 6 minutes here. Tell me what you think about this. And what I really want to know is this: who are the names we're missing? Is it Trump? Is it Hillary? Is it Bill? Is it Obama? Is it Bush? Is it something else? Give me that and we'll sign off on that. Go.
Well, just going back to what Miguel was just referring to about him being a ruined asset, and that if he committed suicide, it was because they knew he was coming for him. I think it's also important to note that when you get into those kind of circles and you have that kind of compromising information on people, it's like a death with honor to go out before you rat. You know, going out without saying a word is respectable. So I would look at it more like if it was a suicide, it was not only because they knew that they would get him out of there one way or another, and if he did,
are you trying to call Epstein a samurai?
It's kind of in their sick world, you know.
I think the more correct term is there's honor among thieves, so to speak. That's the theory in general.
It's like going out. Okay. It's like going out on your shield to keep a lid on your nefarious activities. You know, it's like, oh, I can participate with this and organize this with you guys, but then as soon as I get busted, I'm going to rat you out. It's the same thing like with the mob. You know, you're going to take part in all these nefarious schemes and then rat us out when you get busted. Just save yourself. Well, how many times have we seen people just recently with Whitey Bulger getting bludgeoned in prison for his you know, he was
what he knew.
Yeah, for what he knew and who he was tied to. I think they killed him. I think that if he did commit suicide, it was because he knew what was coming one way or another. So I would agree with that. But the names that are being wrapped up in this, I think, I mean, I listed 50. And
I know, but recent names that matter to the public.
The public has such a shallow view of so many different things that diving.
That's all that matters.
And you know,
well, there were a lot of recent names like Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak was Prime Minister of Israel. You know,
people like Ehud Barak and Ghislaine Maxwell and Alan Dershowitz and all these. These are the people.
Dershowitz is big.
These are the people that are going to get wrapped up into it. It's not going to be Trump and Clinton. Very, very little of that's going to come out. Although Epstein was very well tied, one of the very first donors to the Clinton Foundation.
Well, I don't mean to be, you know, I'm not a Clinton basher, like, you know, like I may be looking like, you know what I mean? But I have to say that of all the celebrity list of names and stuff that Bill, with his record and his record of things that are public, the White House and things like that. I mean, like I stated, what was her name? I'm going to get her name wrong now. The most famous blowjob ever. But anyway,
Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah, Lewinsky. I almost called her Nancy Kerrigan, just so I was way off. But Monica Lewinsky, I mean, she was considered, white trash is white trash, I guess, right? But the point is that
I don't know about that.
A little goofing around there. I'm trying to keep it light. But the point is Monica Lewinsky may not have been underage, but she was uncomfortably younger than Clinton in my book. You know what I mean? He was more than double her age kind of thing and stuff like that. So could you say he has a predilection for young girls? What was he doing on that island? That may be a legitimate question, because if you did partake in that, then you are a criminal and should do some time. It's not, you don't get away with it because of whatever reason is. Now, I'm not accusing Bill, but I'm saying that, I'd be more likely to think Bill was guilty than Stephen Hawking, and I may be way off.
Well, I can say this, guys. I can say this. There is an enormous difference between a 65-year-old man having sex with a 15-year-old girl and a 25-year-old man having sex with a 15-year-old girl. Do we all agree on some macro level that that's the case? Wrong or right, do we recognize that a guy who's 70 years old who's having sex with a girl who's 13 is a big difference, monumentally large difference between a girl who's 15 having sex with a girl with a guy who's 21 or something like that, right? I mean,
I think a better comparison is going to be, if you're a 60-year-old man, how much work, there comes an age difference where,
right,
a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old, there really isn't that much difference except for the legality of it. But it's still really sort of crossing a moral line in most people's eyes. I think that's the one that's a little bit better way to look at it, because when you think
there's a massive manipulation there. Would you agree with that?
Clinton wasn't a pedophile. Absolutely not. When he did what he did with Monica Lewinsky, it's not even in the conversation. But it was still kind of, not right when we look at just plain old right and wrong, right?
You just look at him and you go, well, that's an awful lot of power to concede.
So anyway, the reason I mentioned Bill, and I mentioned him a couple of times, and Trump too. Trump likes young women and stuff. So to me, those two names come up because if they did go to the island and they have records of who was on the plane with him and stuff, and Clinton's name is guilty because of that, then it's, if they actually partook in that, then everybody should go down. If there's video of it, that's what. Review the video. Tell me everybody that partook of a party with 13-year-old girls and put them all in jail.
All of them.
But, so that's the reason, is because of their histories and stuff, and they're hanging around with the guy. They might have the same interests. That's why the names keep coming up. But are there more detailed, more players? And I mean, Trump's smart too. At the end of the day, like you said, you don't trust anybody. He may have been at a party with him and this or that.
And just to end this with a very pessimistic note, as I mentioned earlier, William Barr, who should have been overseeing this whole investigation, should have been making sure that Epstein was safe, using him as putting him on witness protection, protecting this individual. Keep in mind, his father was very well connected to Epstein, and this is my big pessimistic view of this whole thing. The same people who are deeply tied, and that to me is more important than what individual names were connected to this, is the overarching principle that there's elite superstructures that are using sexual blackmail ops to keep people compromised and connected. Keep in mind, William Barr knew that this man tried to commit suicide, did not have him in charge, was not in charge of his safety with U.S. Marshals guarding him, watching him 24/7 on witness protection. He, he was taken off a suicide watch. His cellmates were removed. Cameras were quote unquote non-functioning. The people who are going to be investigating this stuff, I completely agree with you, Miguel and Chad, that whoever was involved in this should go to prison. I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
The people that are going to be investigating this, a lot of them are going to be compromised too. And
You're exactly right. So let me wrap this up with this because we're way over now. But let me just say this, guys. Really, we've got a third part to this series because it's 3 sides to every story. We've got parts 1 and 2. We're going to release those today and tomorrow, and then we're going to go. I hope we can get Scott to come back in and join us, and Scott and Devin, and get them together with Miguel, and I can moderate, and we can talk about things from a I hate to say this because it's not really, it doesn't really fit this, but from a left and a right viewpoint, because that's what 3 sides of stories is really all about. So I hope that we can get everybody to come together and talk about this and come to an agreement that, number one, pedophilia cannot be something that we can say, okay, there's a compromise on this. And number 2, I think it's important that we all are able to continue to dialogue together, because the one thing that the left and the right are not able to do anymore is have real dialogue. So coming from that, we're at 1 hour and 34 minutes, and so we've got to wrap this one up. Devin, do you have anything to say before I wrap this up?
we covered so much information. I think we're good.
Miguel, how about you?
No, I had fun. We got to delve into, some conspiracy theories. And I think that whether you agree or you disagree, everybody owes it to themselves to, do their own research and form their own opinions and stuff. It's important that you use your head and that you're not just fed, company lines from, just CNN headlines and things like that. So, keep your eyes open out there. Even if you disagree with us, keep your eyes open out there. And if you see something, bring it up, because I do believe that it's a 1%ers versus us.
Hey, listen, I'm Chadillac. That's Miguel Iturrate. That's Devin Miller. Don't forget, tune in, drop in, and drop out. Make sure you're part of this conversation. This is 3 sides to every story. We welcome all the comments. We welcome all the subscriptions, all the followers, and all the shares that we can get. We want all the comments that we can have. We want everybody to share this and to talk about this, because we want this to grow, and we want to know exactly what the world thinks about it. And we will be back on this. We're going to try and do another show on this, hopefully tomorrow or the next day. Stay tuned. We've got some other really big things coming up on the CRP, and we really appreciate everybody being there. Hit subscribe. We love you all. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Namaste.